You're listening to Locked On Now NHL, local experts on the biggest stories on the ice. I'm your host, Kim Becker, and thanks so much for making Locked On Now your first listen every weekday. We've got our Locked On NHL hosts here to tell you everything you need to know from around hockey on Monday. We begin in Detroit, where the Red Wings beat out the Ducks in overtime.
The biggest game.
The Detroit Red Wings won in overtime last night over the Anaheim Ducks to bounce back after a tough loss earlier in the week. Our Locked On Red Wings tells you all about the differences between that game and the win on Monday night.
The Detroit Red Wings bounced back after a tough loss to Toronto here on Saturday to beat the Anaheim Ducks and Trevor Zegras 2-1 in overtime. Dylan Larkin does what Dylan Larkin does, gets his 23rd goal of the season, flies past the defenders with a nice backhand shot, opens the scoring for the Detroit Red Wings. Seems like a tale as old as time at this point with how often he scores. I mean, he's just been unreal all season. But the Anaheim Ducks, being the tough team that they are, they didn't get a lot of shots on net, but Jason Hernandez teased that in our crossover. They don't get a lot of shot attempts, but they capitalize on the ones they do. They played neck and neck all night, and it got to overtime, but that's when Jordan Osterley, been waiting half a season, gets his first goal as a Red Wing. The Dearborn native wins it in overtime for the Detroit Red Wings, thanks to Dylan Larkin winning the faceoff. Couldn't have wrote it better myself, guys. We're going to talk about it tonight on Locked On Red Wings.
Nobody needed a reminder, but the Florida Panthers made another statement with their offense last night by scoring 8 goals on the Columbus Blue Jackets. With another full box score to go over, here's our Locked On Panthers post-game.
Another game against the Columbus Blue Jackets where the Florida Panthers score at least 8 goals. What is up, guys? It's Armando Velez from the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, and the Florida Panthers defeat the Columbus Blue Jackets by a final score of 8-4 in Columbus. And last time these two teams faced, the Florida Panthers put up 9 goals against Columbus. And this time on the road at Nationwide Arena, they do it again where they get at least 8 in this one. And this game was led by the third line of Mason Marchment, Anton Lundell, and Sam Reinhart. And the biggest story of the night was Mason Marchment tying a franchise record for most points in a game with 6, getting 2 goals and 4 assists. And Anton Lundell, what can we say about Anton Lundell, who's been averaging a point per game in the last month since December 29th? And definitely has to continue being in the race, at least for the Calder Trophy this year in the NHL. And Sam Reinhart, what a find for the Florida Panthers, getting him in a trade from Buffalo. Started with a point in the first 6 games of his Florida Panthers career, and it took him a little bit to get acclimated into the system that Coach Q at the time and now Andrew Burnett did for the Panthers. And now this third line, you have to win in this league, having not only your top 6 score, but your bottom 6. And it just seems like that every single night there's a different line for this Florida Panthers that is scoring, and Sam Reinhart gets a hat trick in this one. Mason Marchment gets 2 goals, and both of his goals in this one were early in the period. The first one coming into the first period, less than 30 seconds, and then in the third period, just over 30 seconds. So quick scoring by Mason Marchment, and just continues to average a point per game. So to listen to my recap of this 8-4 win against the Columbus Blue Jackets, make sure to listen to the latest episode of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, your first listen of the day.
The Chicago Blackhawks fell flat last night against the Canucks, and our Locked On Blackhawks would rather just put this one in the rear view. He did take enough time to give us the recap, however, post-game before we start looking ahead.
Well, that was fun. Did you all have fun? I know I did. Chicago Blackhawks lose a stinker tonight, 3-1 to the Vancouver Canucks at the United Center. And those first 30 to 40 minutes, and heck, even the entire game, was probably the worst effort we've seen out of the Chicago Blackhawks this season, and that's saying something. But tonight, Vancouver just completely took it to them. I mean, the Blackhawks had no answers for Vancouver's speed. They were trapped in the defensive zone a ton, committed far too many turnovers, and really couldn't get anything going in transition for their big guns like Patrick Kane and Alex DeBrincat. The offense was stymied all night long. Connor Murphy did go on to add a goal late to make this interesting, but the Blackhawks just not nearly a good enough effort. And I think that's the most frustrating part about this loss, right? Is that looking at how the Blackhawks how they have fared recently, even though they had a pretty tough schedule in the past couple of weeks and were playing a couple of the top teams in the entire NHL. They put up pretty good fights against those teams. I know they lost both games in the back-to-back to the Minnesota Wild, but the Blackhawks gave themselves an opportunity, especially in that game on Saturday, the second one. And then in both their games last week against the Colorado Avalanche, a team that is just rolling through everyone right now, the Hawks were right there in both of those third periods and gave themselves a chance to win. And in the middle of that was an 8-5 victory against the Detroit Red Wings. So tonight, against a team that they definitely could beat if they put together their best effort, as we've seen recently in the Vancouver Canucks, they just fell completely short of that. And considering how both the Blackhawks and the Canucks are kind of in a similar position in the standings, right? Both teams need to be picking up wins if they want any hopes of making the playoffs. So for Vancouver to be that much more desperate than the Blackhawks tonight, that was really frustrating. So just a complete stinker here by the Blackhawks. They've now lost 6 of their last 7 games and are more than likely looking at being sellers here as we approach the deadline in the next couple of weeks. For more coverage on this horrendous loss by the Blackhawks, be sure to check out tomorrow's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your team every day.
The New Jersey Devils played well enough to snap their losing streak last night, but Locked On Devils explains that the inability to close the door on the good nights is part of the reason why New Jersey now sits at a 5-game losing streak.
What's up? This is Trey Matthews of Locked On Devils, and here is my post-game reaction. So, the New Jersey Devils lost their 5th straight game to the Toronto Maple Leafs by a score of 6-4. Now, here's the thing. The Devils were actually in a good position to win the game. At one point during the game, they were up 4-2, but they ended up losing the game 6-4. They let the Toronto Maple Leafs score 4 unanswered goals in the final period of play. That cannot happen. Now, I'll give credit when credit is due. I've been talking about Janssen. I've been talking about Zaka. I've been talking about Boquist before in my show. I've been talking about how I wanted all of them to step up in more ways than one, and they did do that. Unfortunately, the New Jersey Devils just don't know how to finish. They should have had that game. They just got cold at the wrong possible time. Late in the game, they went like 8 or so minutes without getting a shot on goal. That cannot happen. And we got to play the Toronto Maple Leafs again. So unless we want to have a deja vu of what happened tonight, we have seriously got to tighten up and learn how to close a game. That was unacceptable. That was horrendous. That was hard to watch. And quite honestly, at some of those plays that the Toronto Maple Leafs were able to score on Schmidt, I just knew they were going to score just based on the defensive lapses that I was seeing from the New Jersey Devils. I don't know what else to say, but very disappointing outing from the New Jersey Devils, especially since they were in a position to win.
That's all for today's Locked On Now NHL, and thank you for making Locked On Now your first listen every weekday. Now that you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL or your local team's Locked On podcast. I'm Kim Becker. This has been Locked On Now NHL, Locked On your team every day.